A lay of Saint Gengulphus Richard Harris Barham non multo post, Gengulphus, in domo sua dormens, ocisius est quidam clerico qui cum uxor sua adulterari solbat. Caius corpus dum infertu in sepulchrum portaritor, multi infirmi detactus sonati sunt. Cum hoc ilias auxari referter ab ancilla sua, silicit dominum suum quam mortarim sanctum miracula facere, iridens illa, et subserans, 8. Ida Gengulphus miracula facit et ut pulvinarium mun cantat, ampersandum. C. Ampersandum. C. Wolfi memorab. Gengulphus comes from the Holy Land, with his scrip, and his bottle, and sandal shoon. Full many a day has he been away, yet his lady deems him returned full soon. Full many a day has he been away, yet scarce had he crossed ayont the sea, ere a spruce young spark of a learned clerk had called on his lady and stopped to tea. This spruce young guest, so trimly dressed, stayed with that lady, her revels to crown. They left, and they ate, and they drank of the best, and they turned the old castle quite upside down. They would walk in the park, that spruce young clerk, with that frolicsome lady so frank and free, trying balls and plays, and all manner of ways, to get rid of what French people call ennui. Now the festive board, with viands is stored, savory dishes be there, I ween, rich puddings and big, and a barbecued pig, an oxtail soup and a china tureen. There's a flagon of ale as large as a paowen, cockle on hat, and staff in hand, while on not they are thinking save eating and drinking, Gengulphus walks in from the Holy Land. You must be pretty deep to catch ourselves asleep, says the proverb, that is, take the fair unawares. A maid, o'er the banisters chancing to peep, whispers, Ma'am, here's Gengulphus a-coming upstairs. Pig, pudding, and soup, the electrified group, with the flagon, pop under the sofa in haste, and contrive to deposit the clerk in the closet, as the dish least of all to Gengulphus's taste. Then oh, what rapture, what joy was expressed, when poor dear Gengulphus at last appeared. She kissed, and she pressed the dear man to her breast, in spite of his great, long, frizzly beard. Such hugging and squeezing! 'Twas almost unpleasing, a smile on her lip, and a tear in her eye. She was so very glad, that she seemed half mad, and did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Then she calls up the maid, and the tablecloth's laid, and she sends for a pint of the best brown stout. On the fire, too, she pops some nice mutton chops, and she mixes a stiff glass of cold without. Then again she began at the poor dear man. She pressed him to drink, and she pressed him to eat, and she brought a foot pan with hot water and bran, to comfort his poor dear travel-worn feet. Nor night nor day since he'd been away, had she had any rest, she vowed and declared. She never could eat one morsel of meat, for thinking how poor dear Gengulphus fared. She really did think she had not slept a wink since he left her, although he'd been absent so long. He here shook his head, right little he said. But he thought she was coming it rather too strong. Now his palate she tickles with the chops and the pickles, till, so great the effect of that stiff gin grog, his weakened body, subdued by the toddy, falls out of the chair, and he lies like a log. Then out comes the clerk from his secret lair. He lifts up the legs, and she raises the head, and, between them, this most reprehensible pair undress poor Gengulphus, and put him to bed. Then the bolster they place athwart his face, and his nightcap into his mouth they cram. And she pinches his nose underneath the clothes, till the poor dear soul went off like a lamb. And now they tried the deed to hide. For a little bird whispered, perchance you may swing. Here's a corpse in the case with a sad swelled face, and a crowner's quest is a queer sort of thing. So the clerk and the wife, they each took a knife, and the nippers that nipped the loaf sugar for tea. With the edges and points they severed the joints at the clavicle, elbow, hip, ankle, and knee. Thus, limb from limb, they dismembered him so entirely, that e'en when they came to his wrists, with those great sugar nippers they nipped off his flippers, as the clerk, very flippantly, termed his fizz. When they'd cut off his head, entertaining a dread lest folks should remember Gengulphus's face, they determined to throw it, where no one could know it, down the well, and the limbs in some different place. But first the long beard from the chin they sheared, and managed to stuff that sanctified hair, with a good deal of pushing, all into the cushion that filled up the seat of a large armchair. They contrived to pack up the trunk in a sack, which they hid in an osier bed outside the town, the clerk bearing arms, legs, and all on his back, as the late Mr. Greenacre served Mrs. Brown. But to see now how strangely things sometimes turn out, and that in a manner the least expected. Who could surmise a man ever could rise who'd been thus carbonaded, cut up, and dissected? No doubt 'twould surprise the pupils at Guy's. I am no unbeliever, no man can say that o' me, but St. Thomas himself would scarce trust his own eyes, if he saw such a thing in his school of anatomy. You may deal as you please with Hindus or Chinese, or a Mussulman making his heathen salam, or a Jew or a Turk, but it's other guesswork when a man has to do with the pilgrim or palmer. By chance the Prince Bishop, a royal divine, sends his cards round the neighborhood next day, and urges his wish to receive a snug party to dine of the resident clergy, the gentry, and burgesses. At 5:15 they are all alive at the palace, for coaches are fast rolling in. And to every guest his card had expressed 1/2 as the hour for a greasy chin. Some 30 are seated, and handsomely treated with the choicest Rhine wines in his Highness's stock. When a Count of the Empire, who felt himself heated, requested some water to mix with his hock. The butler, who saw it, sent a maid out to draw it, but scarce had she given the windlass a twirl, ere Gengulphus's head from the well's bottom said in mild accents, "Do help us out, that's a good girl." Only fancy her dread when she saw a great head in her bucket. With fright she was ready to drop. Conceive, if you can, how she roared and she ran, with the head rolling after her, bawling out "Stop!" She ran and she roared till she came to the board where the Prince Bishop sat with his party around, when Gengulphus's pole, which continued to roll at her heels, on the table bounced up with a bound. Never touching the cates, or the dishes or plates, the decanters or glasses, the sweetmeats or fruits, the head smiles, and begs them to bring him his legs, as a well-spoken gentleman asks for his boots. Kicking open the casement, to each one's amazement, straight a right leg steps in, all impediment scorns, and near the head stopping, a left follows hopping behind, for the left leg was troubled with corns. Next, before the beholders, 2 great brawny shoulders, and arms on their bent elbows dance through the throng, while 2 hands assist, though nipped off at the wrist, the said shoulders and bearing a body along. They march up to the head, not one syllable said, for the 30 guests all stare in wonder and doubt, as the limbs in their sight arrange and unite, till Gengulphus, though dead, looks as sound as a trout. I will venture to say, from that hour to this day, ne'er did such an assembly behold such a scene. Or a table divide 15 guests of a side with a dead body placed in the center between. Yes, they stared well they might at so novel a sight. No one uttered a whisper, a sneeze, or a hem, but sat all bolt upright, and pale with affright. And they gazed at the dead man at them. The Prince Bishop's jester, on punning intent, as he viewed the whole 30, in jocular terms said, they put him in mind of a council of Trent engaged in reviewing the diet of worms. But what should they do? Oh! Nobody knew what was best to be done, either stranger or resident. The Chancellor's self read his Puffendorf through in vain, for his books could not furnish a precedent. The Prince Bishop muttered a curse and a prayer, which his double capacity hit to Anichetti. His princely, or lay half induced him to swear, his episcopal moiety said benedicite. The coroner sat on the body that night, and the jury agreed, not a doubt could they harbor, that the chin of the corpse this whole thing brought to light had been recently shaved by a very bad barber. They sent out von Tanzend, von Burney, von Rowe, von Maine, and von Rowantz through Schlitz and Stowe, towns, villages, hamlets. They told them to go, and they stuck up placards on the walls of the Stadthouse. Murder. Whereas, a dead gentleman, surname unknown, has been recently found at His Highness's banquet, rather shabbily dressed in an amice, or gown in appearance resembling a second-hand blanket. And whereas, there's great reason indeed to suspect that some ill-disposed person or persons, with malice aforethought, have killed and begun to dissect the said gentleman, not very far from the palace. This is to give notice. Whoever shall seize, and such person or persons to justice surrender, shall receive such reward as his highness shall please on conviction of him, the aforesaid offender. And, in order the matter more clearly to trace to the bottom, his highness, the Prince Bishop, further, of his clemency, offers free pardon and grace to all such as have not been concerned in the murder. This day, at our palace, July 25, by command, signed Johann von Rissel. In be deceased rather in years had a squint when alive, and smells slightly of gin linen marked with a G. The newspapers, too, made no little ado, though a different version each managed to dish up. Some said the Prince Bishop had run a man through, others said an assassin had killed the Prince Bishop. The Ent Herald fell foul of the Bruxelles Gazette. The Bruxelles Gazette, with much sneering ironical, scorned to remain in the Ent Herald's single quote debt, and the Amsterdam Times quizzed the Nuremberg Chronicle. In one thing, indeed, all the journals agreed, spite of politics, bias, or party collision, viz., to give, when they'd further accounts of the deed, full particulars soon, in a later edition. But now, while on all sides they rode and they ran, trying all sorts of means to discover the caitiffs, losing patience, the holy Gengulphus began to think it high time to astonish the natives. First, a Rittmeister's Frau, who was weak in both eyes, and supposed the most short-sighted woman in Holland, found greater relief, to her joy and surprise, from one glimpse of his squint than from glasses by Deland. By the slightest approach to the tip of his nose, megrims, headache, and vapors were put to the rout, and one single touch of his precious great toes was a certain specific for chilblains and gout. Rheumatics, sciatica, tic douloureux. Apply to his shin bones, not one of them lingers. All bilious complaints in an instant withdrew, if the patient was tickled with one of his fingers. Much virtue was found to reside in his thumbs. When applied to the chest, they cured scantness of breathing, seasickness, and colic. Or, rubbed on the gums, were remarkably soothing to infants and teething. Whoever saluted the nape of his neck, where the mark remained visible still of the knife, notwithstanding east wind's perspiration might check, was safe from sore throat for the rest of his life. Thus, while each acute, and each chronic complaint, giving way, proved an influence clearly divine, they perceived the dead gentleman must be a saint, so they locked him up, body and bones, in a shrine. Through country and town his new saintship's renown, as a first-rate physician, kept daily increasing, till, as Alderman Curtis told Alderman Brown, it seemed as if wonders had never done ceasing. The three kings of Cologne began, it was known, a sad falling off in their offerings to find. His feats were so many, still the greatest of any, in every sense of the word, was behind. For the German police were beginning to cease from exertions which each day more fruitless appeared, when Gengulphus himself, his fame still to increase, unraveled the whole by the help of his beard. If you look back you'll see the aforesaid barb gris, when divorced from the chin of its murdered proprietor, had been stuffed in the seat of a kind of settee, or double armchair, to keep the thing quieter. It may seem rather strange, that it did not arrange itself in its place when the limbs joined together. Perhaps it could not get out, for the cushion was stout, and constructed of good, strong, maroon-colored leather. Or, what is more likely, Gengulphus might choose, for saints, e'en when dead, still retain their volition, it should rest there, to aid some particular views produced by his very peculiar position. Be that as it may, the very first day that the widowed Gengulphus sat down on that settee, what occurred almost frightened her senses away, besides scaring her handmaidens, Gertrude and Betty. They were telling their mistress the wonderful deeds of the new saint, to whom all the town said their orisons, and especially how, as regards invalids, his miraculous cures far outrivaled von Morison's. The cripples, said they, fling their crutches away, and people born blind now can easily see us. But she, we presume, a disciple of Hume, shook her head, and said angrily, "Curd at judges. Those rascally liars, the monks and the friars, to bring grist to their mill, these devices have hit on. He works miracles. Pooh! I'd believe it of you just as soon, you great geese, or the chair that I sit on." The chair. At that word it seems really absurd, but the truth must be told. What contortions and grins distorted her face. She sprang up from the place just as though she'd been sitting on needles and pins. For, as if the saint spared the rash challenge had heard which she uttered, of what was beneath her forgetful, each particular hair stood on end in the chair, like a porcupine's quills when the animal's fretful. That stout maroon leather, they pierced all together, like tenterhooks holding when clenched from within, and the maids cried, "Good gracious! How very tenacious!" They as well might endeavor to pull off her skin. She shrieked with the pain, but all efforts were vain. In vain did they strain every sinew and muscle, the cushion stuck fast. From that hour to her last she could never get rid of that comfortless bustle. And e'en as Macbeth, when devising the death of his king, heard the very stones prate of his whereabouts, so this shocking bad wife heard a voice all her life crying murder, resound from the cushion, or thereabouts. With regard to the clerk, we are left in the dark, as to what his fate was, but I cannot imagine he got off scot-free, though unnoticed it be both by Ribadeneira and Jacques de Voragine, for cutthroats, we're sure, can be never secure, and history's muse still to prove it her pen holds, as you'll see, if you look in a rather scarce book, God's Revenge Against Murder, by one Mr. Reynolds. Moral: now, you grave married pilgrims, who wander away, like Ulysses of old, vied Homer and Naso, don't lengthen your stay to 3 years and a day. And when you are coming home, just write and say so. And you, learned clerks, who're not given to roam, stick close to your books, nor lose sight of decorum. Don't visit a house when the master's from home. Shun drinking, and study the vit sanctorum. Above all, you gay ladies, who fancy neglect in your spouses, allow not your patience to fail, but remember Gengulphus's wife, and reflect on the moral enforced by her terrible tale.